The courtroom that day was suffocatingly silent. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that weighs heavily on your chest, making even breathing feel forced. The ticking clock, the rustle of paper, the creak of the judge's chair, all echoed in the grim air. Khalil Dawson, a 17-year-old boy, stood next to his court-appended attorney. His wrists were cuffed in front of him, swimming in an oversized orange jumpsuit. His eyes were cast down, not looking at anyone, not uttering a single word. Since the night of his arrest, he had barely spoken, as if his voice had been imprisoned along with his freedom. At the back of the courtroom, Khalil's mother, Nina, sat in silence, her hands clenched so tightly they turned pale, her eyes red from countless sleepless nights. She had called dozens of lawyers, hoping someone would help her son, but no one answered, or they said it was too late or too expensive. The worst part was knowing she was still awake, still present, yet all the doors had long since closed. The judge didn't look at anyone. He simply flipped through a few sheets of paper and announced in an indifferent voice, "In the case of the state of Georgia versus Khalil Dawson, the court finds the defendant guilty on all counts." No hesitation, no emotion, as if reading off a grocery list. Sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Just like that, no explanation, not a moment's pause for the words to even settle. A sob escaped from the back of the room. Nina collapsed, her knees giving way as her body hit the cold floor. Her palms braced against the ground, elbows scraped. A raw and desperate wail tore from her throat. No one helped. No bailiff, no court clerk, not even the lawyer who had stood beside her son. He turned away. The judge didn't blink. He didn't turn around. Khalil stood still. In his hand he tightly gripped a crumpled piece of paper, a charcoal sketch of his mother reading under a desk lamp in their small living room. He had drawn it the night before his arrest. Now it rested in his trembling palm, like a final fragment of memory. "Let's go," the officer's cold voice snapped. Khalil didn't resist. He didn't even ask why. As he walked toward the side door of the courtroom, he turned his head one last time. His mother still lay there, arms stretched toward him, as if trying to hold on to a world that was falling apart. Her lips moved, perhaps in prayer, or simply gasping for air. The door closed behind him with a heavy clack. Inside the courtroom, the next case was already being called. No one remembered the boy who had just been sentenced. No one asked questions. He hadn't just been convicted, he had been erased, forgotten. Have you ever wondered what brings a 17-year-old kid from a small second-floor apartment on Westmore Street to this place? Before the jumpsuit, before the trial, Khalil Dawson was just a quiet kid, always carrying a sketchbook, a small living room, an old couch, a tiny kitchen. His world wasn't much, but it was home. And to Khalil, that was enough. He didn't talk much, never stood out, didn't hang out, but he noticed everything. The way his teacher's shoulders slumped when she was tired, or how the afternoon light stretched across the school walls after class. He kept all of it in his mind like a secret treasure. What do you think of that trial? Was the sentence too swift, too harsh? Do you believe justice is always just, or do you think sometimes it turns a blind eye? When the images in his mind were fully formed, Khalil would quietly put them on paper. He loved to draw, a silent but fierce kind of love. His sketchbook was always with him, from the school cafeteria to the bus stop. His pages told the story of the world around him. Faces of friends, teachers, strangers, a rusted fire hydrant on the corner, the grocery store on 5th Street, or his mother asleep on the couch, a book still open in her lap. Khalil didn't post his art online. He didn't boast. He didn't need to. But there was one place where he felt seen, the county library about 6 blocks from school. In a hidden corner near the genealogy archives, there was an old scanner, slow but clean. That's where he carefully digitized the drawings he was most proud of. Miss Gloria, the awful librarian, always smiled when she saw him. Back again, Khalil. Some art school's going to be real surprised when they see your work. She wasn't just being nice. After his mom, she was the first person who truly believed he had talent. Thank you, Miss Gloria, Khalil would reply softly before diving into his work. He scanned each portrait, every cityscape, even his abstract sketches. Anything that made him proud. Every file was carefully named and saved to his USB. He was preparing his application for the Future of Art Scholarship, a prestigious national program that could earn him a full ride to a top art school. The odds were slim, thousands of applicants. But Khalil didn't give up. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was holding on to something big. When he received the letter of recommendation from his English teacher, he didn't tell anyone. He gently tucked it into the inner pocket of his sketchbook and walked home step by step, like he was carrying a treasure. That night, he stopped by his usual corner store. A sandwich for himself and a box of strawberries, his mom's favorite. Whenever he had a little extra spending money, he always bought some for her. When he got home, she was folding laundry in front of the TV. He handed her the box, and a tired but warm smile spread across her face. "You still remember?" his mother asked. "Of course," Khalil replied, already pulling out his pen. He began sketching her, the way she sat, the slight furrow in her brow when she concentrated, her hands moving gently through each old shirt. But he never showed her that drawing. He kept it, planning to include it in the home section of his scholarship portfolio. That fateful day was a Thursday afternoon. The sunlight was soft, warming his back, making it easy to forget that danger could be lurking on any street corner. Khalil had just finished scanning a new batch of drawings at the library. Everything had gone smoothly. He double-checked the files, packed up his sketchbook, and started walking home. But first he stopped by Martinez's, a neighborhood convenience store he'd gone to for years. A bag of potato chips, a chocolate bar, and a box of strawberries. Total, $6.75. "Getting ready for something big?" Mr. Martinez asked as he rang up the items. Khalil nodded. "A scholarship." The shop owner smiled and handed back the change. Khalil walked out with the bag in one hand, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. Everything seemed calm. And then, in red and blue lights, 2 patrol cars slammed to a stop right in front of Khalil. Have you ever experienced that moment when, in a single blink, your whole world flips upside down, when the warmth of a peaceful afternoon turns into the beginning of a nightmare? No sirens, no loudspeaker, just a sudden presence. Blinding, deafening, overwhelming. Khalil didn't even have time to turn around before a voice barked from behind. "Hands where we can see them." He froze. Another voice, sharper. "I said, get on your knees." Rough hands grabbed him, yanked his arms back. His bag hit the sidewalk. The box of strawberries burst open, red juice pooling on the pavement like blood. His sketchbook slipped free, pages fluttering in the wind, charcoal smudging as they spun. A hard shove drove his face into the cold concrete. His chest slammed down, knocking the breath from his lungs. The metallic snap of handcuffs. Ice-cold steel bit into his wrists. "Male, black, blue hoodie matches the description," one officer said. Khalil opened his mouth. He wanted to say something. About the library, about Miss Gloria, about the scholarship portfolio in his backpack. But what stopped him wasn't fear. It was memory. His mother's voice, whispering every night. "If they stop you, don't argue, don't run, don't move, stay still, so you can stay alive." So he stayed still, his cheek pressed against the burning pavement. One officer patted him down. The chips were crushed. The chocolate rolled into the gutter. The strawberries bled, thin red streaks trailing along the edge of the curb. And the sketchbook, now wide open, pages torn, revealing the drawing of his mother curled on the couch, now ripped in half without mercy. No one looked at it. "Robbery over on 47th. said the taller officer. Game store. Witness said the suspect in a blue hoodie ran south. Khalil kept trying to breathe, trying to understand how everything had unraveled in less than a minute. You matched the description. A sentence. Like a verdict, nothing else needed. I was just at the library, he managed to say. Explain it at the station, the officer cut in flatly. No one asked his name. No one checked his ID. No one opened his backpack. The back door of the patrol car swung open. A hand pushed his head down. The door slammed shut behind him with a solid thud. Through the tiny window, Khalil saw his sketchbook lying on the sidewalk, pages still rustling in the breeze. That was the last image he saw before the car pulled away. He hadn't run, he hadn't hidden, but no one cared about the truth. They just wanted an ending. And Khalil, he looked enough like the person they'd already chosen for that ending. Have you ever been judged just by how you look, just because you match someone? Does that mean your whole future can be taken away? 10 minutes before the hearing, Khalil met his court-appointed attorney for the first time. Mr. Hayes. Gray suit, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, one hand holding a file, the other glued to his phone. He didn't sit, didn't ask much. Flipped through a few sheets, then looked up and asked bluntly, "Anything you want to say before we go in?" Khalil hesitated. "I was at the library. Miss Gloria saw me. You can check the cameras." Mr. Hayes nodded vaguely as if listening to an echo. "We'll look into it," he said quickly. Just as the courtroom doors swung open, they were called in. Inside, the room was nearly empty. No jury, just a few court staff, a sleepy-looking court officer, and Judge Roland Pierce seated sternly on the bench. Khalil was still in cuffs. He wore a borrowed suit, much too big, sleeves hanging past his wrists. Behind him, his mother sat silently, hollow-eyed, her trembling hands folded in her lap. The hearing began abruptly. Case 2039A, State versus Khalil Dawson. The young prosecutor in a crisp navy suit stood, without glancing at Khalil. She presented the case in just 3 minutes. The evidence? A blurry photo from the GameStop security camera. A glove found in Khalil's backpack, the kind artists use to avoid smudging their drawings. And a partial fingerprint on that glove. That was it. At first, Mr. Hayes said nothing. When prompted by the judge, he stood awkwardly, cleared his throat, and said, "My client is a student, no prior record. At the time of the incident, he was at the public library. Are there any witnesses?" the judge asked, his tone indifferent, as if just going through the motions. "No, Your Honor, we haven't been able to reach the librarian." And then, for the first and only time, Khalil spoke. "Please, I wasn't there. Ask Ms. Gloria. She'll tell the truth." The prosecutor immediately cut in, her voice sharp and cold. "This isn't a debate club. You're not allowed to speak." Khalil fell silent again. The judge didn't react. He didn't ask any follow-up questions. Didn't mention the librarian. He didn't even look at Khalil. At the clerk's desk, Elena Vargas was typing every word into the record. She'd worked with Judge Pierce for nearly 5 years. She knew his style well, quick, cold, and final. But today, something made her stomach knot. She clearly remembered seeing the case files before. A traffic cam photo near the library, time-stamped. A report noting that GameStop surveillance cameras had malfunctioned on the day in question, and discrepancies in the glove's sizing. But now, those documents were gone. The system only held a slim case file, much shorter than before. She checked twice, then a third time, but she couldn't say anything. Judge Pierce leaned forward. "The court finds the evidence sufficient for prosecution. Bail is denied." The gavel slammed down, echoing off the marble walls like a door being sealed shut. Khalil turned, trying to see his mother, but the court officer was already pulling him toward the side door. His mother opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. And just as he had throughout the hearing, Judge Pierce never once looked at the boy, whose voice he had just erased. Have you ever felt like you weren't a person but a number in a system, just an entry on a docket? To Khalil, this wasn't a trial. It was a script, written ahead of time, read aloud, and closed shut before he ever set foot in the courtroom. The truth could scream itself hoarse, but if the system decides not to listen, who will hear it? 3 weeks after his arrest, Khalil sat silently on the edge of a narrow metal bed in Fulton County Juvenile Detention Center. Pale gray walls, lights that never fully turned off, like time itself had frozen. No day, no night, just a drag of endless hours with no finish line. That evening, during phone call hour, a guard tapped him gently on the shoulder. "One call, make it quick." Khalil stood slowly. His hands felt heavy, fingers numb from holding a pen too tightly, for too long. He remembered only one number, and it wasn't his mother's. She couldn't afford to accept a collect call, and even if she could, what could she possibly do? The number he dialed was one his mother made him memorize at age 10, back when the man on the other end still occasionally sent birthday cards. He'd never called it, not once. But this time Khalil pressed each number deliberately. The phone rang in Washington, D.C., in the middle of a major press conference. Before a wall of cameras and dozens of reporters, the Attorney General of the United States, Luther Pryor, was speaking firmly. "We are committed to justice and social equity." The phone buzzed in his pocket, once, then again. Unknown number. Something made him pause. He held up a hand. "Excuse me, I need a moment." He stepped away from the podium into the side hallway, away from cameras, away from lights, alone with the quiet hum of an air conditioner. He answered, "This is Luther Pryor. Who is this?" Silence. Then a breath. And a voice, deeper now, unfamiliar but achingly familiar, spoke. "It's me, your son. I need help." Luther didn't speak right away, not because he didn't recognize the voice, but because all the memories came rushing back. Unopened letters, missed holidays, the deliberate distance he'd kept from his son's life. Guilt now rose like a flood. On the other end, Khalil almost hung up when Luther finally responded slowly. "Where are you?" "Georgia. Fulton County Juvenile Detention." Silence again. "What happened?" Khalil swallowed hard. "They said I robbed a GameStop. I didn't. I was at the library, but they wouldn't listen. They gave me life, no parole." Luther leaned against the wall, his hand trembling slightly. The hallway suddenly felt colder, quieter, the kind of silence that forces you to face yourself. An hour later, he sat alone in his office, lights off, curtains drawn, jacket draped over the back of the chair, tie loosened around his neck. Before him lay stacks of policy documents, reform speeches and proposals with bold titles like Reconstructing Justice. All of it now seemed meaningless, because after years of building a system he believed in, one 5-minute phone call had made it clear that very system had crushed the son he had once walked away from, but never stopped thinking about. That night, Luther Pryor didn't sleep. The Attorney General of the United States, the nation's symbol of law and justice, sat alone in the dark, completely powerless. Meanwhile, his son, Khalil, a child not yet 18, sat in a concrete cell, condemned to slowly die within 4 walls. Luther didn't turn to alcohol, nor did he retreat into familiar speeches. He opened his laptop. His fingers typed the search. Dawson Khalil, case no 1245, J.D. Fulton County. The documents loaded slowly, line after line, image after image. And the first red flag appeared almost instantly. The traffic cam footage, supposedly placing Khalil near the scene, had been tampered with. The shadows didn't align with the son's position that day. A license plate in the background was unusually clear, almost as if it had been digitally rendered. Sophisticated forgery. Luther forwarded the clip to his cybersecurity advisor. Next, he opened the forensic report. In the original notes, the fingerprint on the glove was marked inconclusive, but in the final version it had somehow become possible match. Luther cross-checked the lab's reporting history. and found this wasn't the first time their language had quietly shifted. Then he pulled up Judge Roland Pierce's profile. That's when everything flipped. Charts, sentencing statistics, dozens of cases involving juveniles, nearly all young black males, average trial length 1.8 days, defense motions frequently denied, plea deals routinely ignored, maximum sentences given in 94% of cases. Each number cut like a knife, not just through the law, but through the very concept of justice Luther once believed in. By dawn, Luther had printed dozens of reports. They were scattered across his office floor like crime scene photos. He looked at them and thought, if I do this, everything I've built will collapse. Every policy, every reform, every political path forward, because this wasn't just one judge, this was an entire system designed to protect itself. And if he exposed it, the fallout would be brutal. That afternoon he made a call. On the other end was Professor Matthews, retired now, living in North Carolina, the man who once taught him constitutional law and legal ethics. More importantly, Matthews had never been blinded by politics. They met at a quiet coffee shop near the Department of Justice. Luther sat down, eyes heavy with conflict. I need to ask you something. And I want the truth. Matthews stirred his coffee gently. Go ahead. If your son had been broken by this system, and you knew for a fact it was wrong, what would you do? Matthews looked at him, voice firm and without hesitation. I'd remember why I became a lawyer in the first place, and if I had to, I'd burn the whole system down. That night, Luther returned to the Department of Justice under cover of darkness. No press, no aides, no lights, just a mission. He summoned 4 young attorneys, all under 30, sharp minds, unjaded by cynicism, people who still believed the law could mean something good. Sarah Chen, technology law. Marcus Wright, criminal defense. Daniela Ruiz, human rights. Jamal Thomas, federal litigation. They met in a secure conference room, curtains drawn, phones off. Luther spoke plainly. Nothing leaves this room. You report only to me. We're investigating Judge Roland Pierce. Every case he's ruled on in the past 10 years. Sarah blinked. On what grounds? Corruption, evidence suppression, ethical violations. You'll see it all. He handed each of them a USB, color-coded. Start with Khalil Dawson. But don't stop there. Luther Pryor, who had spent his entire life climbing to the peak of the justice system, now understood the only way to save his son was to dismantle that very system. Not out of revenge, not for political gain, but for the truth. This time, Luther Pryor didn't look away, and he wasn't alone. Elena Vargas, the quiet court clerk, the kind the system favored, fast, compliant, invisible, indifferent. 5 years under Judge Pierce had taught her 3 survival rules. Don't ask, don't stand out, don't care. But now, every night when she closed her eyes, she saw that boy's face. Khalil Dawson, the silent kid with the little sketchbook. Not a defendant, just a student. Her email was brief. No name, no signature, just a message. I have documents, internal notes, deleted evidence. Please meet. No cameras, no names, just truth. Her finger hovered over the mouse. Then she clicked send and regretted it instantly. But it was too late. 2 days later, at a quiet cafe on the edge of downtown, Elena waited. The place was nearly empty. A couple sat in a far corner. The barista hummed off-key. Outside, the soft spring sunlight filtered through a quiet street. Elena sat near the window, her wool coat wrapped tightly around her. On her lap, a worn canvas bag. Inside it, a single USB. Her fingers traced the frayed stitching. Then the door opened. 2 people entered. Early 30s, simple clothes, alert eyes, but kind. Sarah Chen and Marcus Wright, members of Luther Pryor's secret task force. They sat across from her. Sarah spoke gently. "Mrs. Vargas?" Eleanor didn't answer. She simply reached into her bag and slid the USB across the table. "Everything's in there. The original traffic cam footage, internal notes, email threads. Pay attention to the timestamps. Judge Pierce personally pulled Khalil's file the morning before the case was even assigned. No request, no protocol." Sarah frowned. "Why would he do that?" Elena looked up, her voice soft but steady. "Because his grandson, Thomas Pierce, is the director of Central Juvenile Detention Center, where Khalil was sent." Marcus clenched his jaw. "That wasn't disclosed during the trial." "No, it was buried, like everything else." Lena lifted her coffee cup. "Lukewarm hours ago. A week ago, someone broke into my apartment," she whispered. "They didn't touch the laptop, didn't go near the jewelry, but they tore through my brother's immigration paperwork, his green card file." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "That's a threat?" Elena gave a hollow laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Message received." She was quiet for a long moment. Then from her coat pocket she pulled out a small folded piece of paper. A sketch Khalil had once left behind on a courtroom bench. Crude pencil lines captured her, head bowed, typing, exhausted but proud. "Oh, used to draw during hearings," she said softly. "Little things, the corners of the room, faces, stances. He saw everything, even me." Elena's eyes glistened. "That's why I'm here. Not because I'm brave. I'm not. But he saw me when no one else did. And now this whole system is pretending he never existed." She took a deep breath. "I can't stay silent. He's just a kid, and they're trying to erase him like he never mattered." Sarah and Marcus didn't say anything right away. In that moment, silence held more weight than any verdict. They didn't look at Elena Vargas with suspicion. They looked at her with something close to reverence. Because not all heroes wear shining armor. Some walk into battle in simple flats, holding a cold cup of coffee, and refuse to disappear. Elena was never meant to be a hero. She was just a court clerk, a quiet name at the bottom of a transcript, a pair of hands typing someone else's story. But in a system built on silence, sometimes a whisper is enough to cause an earthquake. And in that small coffee shop, a whisper was about to shake an entire machine, once thought unshakable. Elsewhere, in a place where the gray walls still sweated with damp and silence reigned as always, something inside Khalil had shifted. He couldn't sleep anymore. The long nights blurred into one endless hallway of stillness. But in that stillness, he began to draw again. It started with Marcus, the older man who worked in the laundry room. Big build, gentle eyes, with a daughter who wrote poetry for school contests. Khalil asked about her. "He's got my nose," Marcus grinned, "and her mom's stubborn streak." Khalil sketched the girl, standing on a stage made of ruled notebook paper. Then came Deshawn, a not yet 18 kid who hummed old Motown soul songs while mopping floors, who dreamed of starting a food truck. Tony, a sci-fi addict who'd read Dune 3 times. And William, who could make green shoots grow from plastic buckets in the prison yard. Each drawing was more than lines. They held memory, voice, presence. One day during yard time, Jamal Khalil's quiet, observant cellmate handed him a small bundle. "The library lady sent this. Real stuff, not the cheap kind." Inside were 5 sheets of textured art paper, the kind Khalil hadn't touched since before he was arrested. Jamal leaned in close. "Use it before they take it. And here, what you create is the only thing they can't erase." But word travels fast. The guards began to notice, not overtly, just an unnatural quiet every time he passed by. Their eyes lingered too long on whatever he held in his hands. So Khalil drew faster, and when Zavenia, a retired teacher volunteering as a literacy instructor, came by, Khalil quietly slipped an envelope into her tote. No name, no return address. Just one thing inside, a testimony in images from a soul the system was trying to erase. One single word written in pencil on the front of the envelope. Inside, a voice. 2 weeks later, the sketches began to spread, at first in local art collectives, then on social media, then in human rights forums. People didn't see them as drawings, they saw them as declarations. Each portrait carried a name, a story, a favorite song lyric, or a line of poetry written by a daughter for her dad. One sketch showed an older man with his eyes closed, the caption reading, "She used to hymn hymns while she cooked. I still hear them in my sleep." Another portrayed a young boy looking out the window of his cell. "I ran because I was scared, not because I was guilty." The movement exploded. Inside, a voice became a viral phrase across every platform. Human rights attorneys shared the images. Artists offered to turn them into murals. A gallery in D.C. cleared an entire wall for an exhibit. Inside the cell, Khalil knew nothing of it. No internet, no news, no echoes from the outside world. But one day, during library time, a new inmate quietly slipped him a scrap of paper. People out there are starting to hear us. They see what you draw. They see us. Khalil folded the note carefully and tucked it into the spine of his sketchbook. Then he whispered, not to anyone, but to the space around him. "You can cage us, but you can't erase who we are." In a place designed to strip away identity, Khalil had found a way to restore it. Not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been reduced to a number in the system. With only pencil and paper, he had turned inmates back into people. The hearing room that morning smelled of old paper and polished wood. Golden sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows over the desks where senators bent over their binders. At the center of the room sat Luther Pryor, no longer the Attorney General. Today, he wasn't a politician. He was a father. This wasn't a routine policy briefing, it was a reckoning. He didn't need a speech or drama. Instead, he placed a thick file on the table. His hands trembled slightly, but his grip was firm. He opened the cover. A heavy silence blanketed the room. Sentencing logs, racial disparity charts, a timeline of cases closed in under 48 hours. Each page a quiet horror. Rushed trials, maximum sentences, black children disappearing with no one asking why. He didn't need to exaggerate. The numbers spoke for themselves. Then he pressed a button. The room dimmed. A screen lit up. Not graphs, not statistics, faces. Each of Khalil's portraits appeared, every graphite line sketching out a life. A tired-eyed man with a crumpled poem in his pocket. A teenager staring out a window drawn in pencil. A father clutching a toy. The caption, "She still asks when Daddy's coming home." The entire room held its breath. Across the Capitol, the streets were no longer quiet. Protesters flooded the marble steps, banners raised high. "Justice for Khalil. Erase corruption, not our kids." Inside is the voice, outside is the truth. A circle of law students stood in silence, each holding a printed portrait. Projected against the courthouse wall, glowing in the sunlight, was the image of Khalil's sketchbook, the symbol of a boy who used art to awaken a system. On TV, anchors spoke in solemn tones. One side of the screen showed Luther standing firm at the podium, his jaw tight with restraint. The other side showed Khalil's sketches rolling by like a testimony drawn in lead. The New York Times, judicial system shaken by proof of racial bias. NPR, teens art campaign becomes a national movement. CNN, inside, a voice exposes years of trial misconduct. The pressure was no longer political, it was public, it was human. Back in the hearing room, Luther spoke again, this time his voice low, as if he were speaking only to himself. "I used to believe this system could fix itself. I believed in the slow rhythm of justice." He lifted his head, locking eyes with each senator. But justice delayed is not justice. And for too many, it was never even an option. That day, Luther didn't just expose a judge. He pulled back the curtain the nation had long avoided, revealing decay that stretched far beyond Khalil. And with that act, he turned whispers of injustice into a roar heard across the country. Outside, the chants rose like a tidal wave. Justice for Khalil. End racist courts. We see you now. This was no longer just about one boy. It was about every name that had never been spoken, every face the courts had turned away from. And finally, the nation had begun to see. The federal appeals courtroom that day was nothing like the one where Khalil had once been convicted. No flickering fluorescent lights, no rushed files, no eyes skimming over him as if he didn't exist. Here, sunlight poured through high-arched windows. Here, people were ready to listen. On the bench sat Judge Diana Martinez, a calm but commanding presence. She had once been a defense attorney for those forgotten by the system. She adjusted her glasses, looked around the room, and nodded. We will hear the appeal of Khalil Dawson. This time, Khalil was no longer alone. Beside him sat a team of human rights attorneys. Behind him were his mother, Luther, and an entire nation watching. The evidence was presented, laid bare like bone in the light. Edited video footage.
Suppressed reports. A judge with financial ties to the juvenile detention center that held Khalil. Then came a voice no one expected. A witness behind a privacy screen. The voice altered, but the words cut clean. Elena Vargas. She spoke of nights spent deleting files, of court sessions sealed in haste, of Judge Pierce pulling Khalil's file himself, bypassing every legal procedure. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. He knew the boy was innocent, but he chose to silence him. When her testimony ended, the room was still. Judge Martinez turned to Khalil. Her voice wasn't cold like Pierce's, it was measured, sincere. Mr. Dawson, before I give my ruling, do you have anything you'd like to say? He's still thin, still quiet, but resolute. He looked at his mother, then at Luther, then out as if to the world beyond the courtroom. I never wanted to be a symbol, he said softly. I just wanted to draw. But if what happened to me helps someone else be seen, then maybe it was worth it. He sat down and waited. Judge Martinez didn't hesitate. Based on new evidence, including due process violations and judicial misconduct, this court vacates the previous conviction. Khalil Dawson, you are free. There was no roaring applause, no dramatic sobbing, just the soft sound of a mother burying her face in her hands, weeping with joy, and the long, slow exhale of a boy who had held his breath in the dark for far too long. That night, Khalil sat quietly on the edge of the bed in his old room. The posters had faded. The books were still where he'd left them. But the silence no longer felt like a cage. It was space to fill. He opened a drawer, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, then walked to the wall and pinned it there. Carried that page, clean, white, empty. There wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. They had tried to erase him, erase his voice, erase his future, erase his name from the map of the living. But now the world was listening, and Khalil was just getting started. If Khalil's story moved you, don't let it end here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac Stories to follow more real, powerful, and necessary stories. The reason we keep going, one voice, one truth, one story, and then a world begins to change. If Khalil's story touched you, don't stay silent. Like this video as a show of support, share it so someone else can hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac Stories to be part of stories that truly deserve to be told. In the world, one like, one subscription, one voice no longer forgotten,